Professor Lisa Hamilton walked through the grand hallways of the Galactic Institute of Interspecies Studies. The massive building floated in space above the planet Kepler 442b, its crystal walls showing the stars beyond. She had been teaching history at small colleges on Earth for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Today she would teach her first class to alien students about human warfare. The invitation had arrived 6 months ago through official channels. The Galactic Council wanted a human professor to teach comparative military history. They said it would help other species understand Earth better before humanity joined the Council. Lisa had jumped at the chance even though she wondered why. They picked warfare as the subject to study. She carried her datapad in a small bag containing a few items from Earth. Pictures of battlefields, old weapons, and medals her grandfather had earned in Vietnam. She thought the physical objects might help explain things that words could not. The classroom door opened with a soft hiss. Inside, 12 students sat in specially designed seats that fit their different body types. Lisa had studied their files, but seeing them in person still amazed her. These beings came from worlds she had only dreamed about. Near the front sat Zektar, whose body looked like living crystal. Light moved through his transparent form in slow waves. His people, the Regelians, came from a world where creatures communicated through harmonic sounds. They had not fought a war in over 10,000 years. When they disagreed, they would sing together until they found harmony. Behind him floated Velnara in a tank of blue liquid. Her squid-like body pulsed, with soft lights that changed color as she thought. The cetaceans from the Whale Nebula had evolved in deep oceans. They settled disputes by creating beautiful light shows that told stories of compromise and understanding. In the back corner, Korth made soft clicking sounds. The insect-like being had 4 arms and large compound eyes. His species shared a hive, mind so individual violence was impossible. If one member of their society felt pain, they all felt it. This made them the most peaceful species in the galaxy. Other students filled the remaining seats. There was Mordek, whose rock-like skin could change texture based on his emotions. The twin sisters Lila and Kira shared one body, but had 2 heads, that often disagreed on small matters, though never violently. A floating gas creature named Wisp barely held together in the room's atmosphere. Lisa set down her bag and looked at her students. They gazed back with what she assumed was curiosity, though alien expressions were hard to read. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "I am Professor Lisa Hamilton from Earth. I am here to teach you about warfare and military history from my world." Zektar's crystal form brightened slightly, which Lisa had learned meant he was pleased. "Professor Hamilton, we are excited to learn about Earth's conflicts. Our research shows your species has had some small disagreements over resources. We hope to understand how you resolved them so quickly." Lisa blinked. Small disagreements resolved quickly? She wondered what research they had been reading. "I think there might be some confusion about the scale of human conflicts. What exactly do you know about Earth's wars?" Velnara's lights shifted to a gentle green. "Our databases show that Earth humans have had approximately 12 minor territorial disputes over the past century. Most lasted between 3 and 7 days. The casualties were usually fewer than 100 beings per conflict. This fits the normal pattern for young species." The other students nodded or made their species equivalent gestures of agreement. Korth clicked approvingly. "Yes, this is typical. Most intelligent species have brief ritual combats to establish dominance. Usually the weaker side surrenders after a small show of force. We are curious how humans made these contests more efficient than most species." Lisa felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. They had no idea what they were about to learn. The galactic databases had somehow completely missed the reality of human warfare. She wondered if this was deliberate or if previous human diplomats had tried to hide the truth. "I need to correct some information," Lisa said carefully. "Human warfare is not small or brief. Our conflicts have lasted for years, sometimes decades. The casualties number in the millions, not hundreds." The classroom fell silent. Several students made confused sounds. Wisp's gaseous form actually condensed slightly, which indicated shock among his species. Mordek's rocky skin shifted to a darker texture. Professor, perhaps there is a translation error. Did you mean thousands of casualties? That would be unusual but not unheard of among developing species. No, Lisa said quietly. I meant millions. In some wars, we lost more people in a single day than your entire species might lose in a century of accidents. Zektar's light patterns became erratic. But that would mean... No, that cannot be correct. No species could survive such losses and still function as a civilization. Lisa opened her bag and pulled out a photograph. It showed soldiers in a muddy trench during World War I. Their faces were dirty and exhausted. Behind them, the landscape was destroyed, with broken trees and shell craters as far as the eye could see. This picture was taken during what we call the Great War or World War I. It lasted 4 years. Over 17 million people died. She held up the photograph so everyone could see it. The alien students stared in stunned silence. Several of them made distress sounds that their universal translators could not convert into words. Lila, one of the two-headed students, spoke with both mouths at once, something that only happened when her species was extremely upset. 4 years? How could any conflict last 4 years? Surely your leaders would have negotiated peace after a few days of such horror. The leaders kept fighting because they believed their cause was right, Lisa explained. Millions of young men went to war thinking they would be home by Christmas. Instead, they spent years living in muddy holes in the ground, fighting over a few yards of territory. Korth's clicking became rapid and distressed. This does not compute with hive mind logic. If your species felt the pain of every death, the war would have ended immediately. How do humans endure such massive suffering? We feel the pain, Lisa said, but we do not share it the way your species does. Each human experiences grief individually. This allows us to continue fighting even when the losses become enormous. Velnara's lights shifted to dark blue, indicating deep sadness among her people. Professor Hamilton, you said this was called World War I. The number suggests there was a Second World War. Lisa nodded grimly. There was. World War II started just 21 years later. It was much larger and more destructive than the first one. The classroom erupted in confused sounds. Wisp actually lost cohesion for a moment before pulling himself back together. Zektar's crystal form went completely dark, which Lisa had never seen before. Impossible, Mordek said, his skin shifting through several textures rapidly. No species repeats such devastating mistakes. Your civilization should have learned from the first conflict. Humans are very good at learning from war, Lisa said. Unfortunately, what we often learn is how to fight the next war more effectively. She looked around the room at the shocked faces of her students. These beings came from species that viewed conflict as an aberration, something to be avoided at all costs. They could not understand how an intelligent species could not only wage such brutal wars, but then do it again and again. I think that is enough for today's introduction, Lisa said gently. Next class, we will begin studying World War I in detail. I recommend you prepare yourselves mentally. What you will learn about human warfare will challenge everything you think you know about intelligent behavior. The students filed out slowly, making quiet, distressed sounds. Lisa packed her materials and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But the galaxy needed to understand humanity before Earth joined the Galactic Council. Better they learn the truth now than discover it during a crisis. She just hoped their civilizations could handle the reality of what humans were capable of when pushed to war. Professor Lisa Hamilton stood before her alien students 3 days later. The classroom felt different now. The excitement from the first day had been replaced by nervous tension. Several students had contacted her asking if they could skip the lesson, but she had gently insisted they needed to understand human history completely. Zektar's crystal body was dimmer than usual. Velnara's lights pulsed in worried yellow patterns. Even Korth's usual clicking sounds were quieter and more hesitant. The other students seemed equally anxious about what they might learn. Lisa had spent the past 3 days preparing her materials, carefully. She knew that what she was about to teach would shock these peaceful beings, but they needed to understand the truth about humanity. Today, we will study World War I in detail, she began. But first, let me explain how it started. She activated the holographic display in the center of the room. A map of Earth appeared, showing Europe in the year 1914. The continents looked peaceful, with neat borders marking different countries. On June 28, 1914, a young man named Gavrilo Princip shot and killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, Lisa explained. The Archduke was visiting the city of Sarajevo with his wife. Mordek's rocky skin shifted to a curious texture. One assassination caused a world war? How is that possible? The countries of Europe had made many agreements to help each other if attacked, Lisa said. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia because of the assassination, other countries joined in to honor their promises. Within 6 weeks, most of Europe was at war. WISP's gaseous form swirled in confusion. But surely the leaders realized this was foolish? Why didn't they stop the escalation? Many people thought the war would be over quickly, Lisa replied. Soldiers marched off singing songs, expecting to be home for Christmas dinner. Nobody understood what modern weapons could do when used on such a large scale. The holographic display changed to show the Western Front. A long line appeared across France and Belgium, representing the trenches where millions of men would live and die. When the armies met, they discovered that new weapons made traditional fighting impossible. Lisa continued. Machine guns could fire hundreds of bullets per minute. Artillery shells could kill dozens of men at once, so both sides dug long ditches called trenches. She showed them cross-section views of the trench systems. The aliens stared at the narrow, muddy holes that stretched for hundreds of miles. Lila spoke with one head while the other remained silent, a sign of deep disturbance. You mean soldiers lived in these holes in the ground? For years, Lisa confirmed. The trenches were filled with mud, rats, and disease. Men lived there through freezing winters and burning summers. They ate cold food from cans and slept standing up because lying down meant drowning in the mud. Velnara's lights flickered rapidly, indicating extreme distress. How many soldiers lived this way? Millions, Lisa said simply. Along the Western Front alone, there were usually between 2 and 3 million men living in trenches at any given time. The holographic display changed again, showing the area between the opposing trenches. It was a wasteland of mud, broken wire, and shell craters. This space between the trenches was called no man's land, Lisa explained. It was usually between 50 and 500 yards wide. The ground was poisoned by chemicals and covered with unexploded shells. Nothing could live there. Zektar's crystal form had grown so dim that Lisa worried he might be ill. Professor Hamilton, how did soldiers cross this area to attack the enemy? Lisa's expression grew grim. They climbed out of their trenches and ran directly at the machine guns. The classroom fell completely silent. Even the soft humming of the air recycling system seemed loud. On July 1, 1916, British forces began the Battle of the Somme, Lisa continued. 60,000 British soldiers attacked German trenches on the first day. They walked slowly across no man's land, carrying heavy equipment. She activated a new hologram showing waves of soldiers moving across broken ground, while flashes of light indicated machine gun fire. The German machine gunners had clear targets. They fired continuously as the British soldiers approached. By the end of that first day, 20,000 British soldiers were dead and 40,000 were wounded. Korth's clicking stopped entirely. His compound eyes seemed to lose focus as his hive mind struggled to process this information. Wisp's form began to lose cohesion again. 20,000 dead in one day? That is more than the total population of my home colony. The battle continued for 4.5 months, Lisa said quietly. When it ended, over 1 million soldiers from both sides had been killed or wounded. The British forces had advanced 6 miles. Mordek's skin shifted through textures so rapidly that it hurt to look at. 1 million casualties to move 6 miles? Why didn't they stop after the first day? Because both sides believed that the next attack would be the one that broke through, Lisa explained. Generals kept sending more men, hoping that sheer numbers would eventually overcome the defenses. The holographic display changed to show soldiers wearing strange masks and carrying equipment that looked like backpacks with hoses. When normal attacks failed, both sides began using chemical weapons, Lisa continued. They released poisonous gas that would drift across no man's land and settle in the enemy trenches. Felnara's lights went completely dark for a moment, something Lisa had never seen from her species. Poison gas? You mean they tried to kill each other with chemicals? Chlorine gas burned the lungs and throat, Lisa explained. Phosgene gas caused fluid to build up in the lungs, drowning soldiers slowly. Mustard gas burned the skin and blinded people. It could soak into clothing and keep burning for hours. Several students made sounds of horror that their translators couldn't process. Lila's second head finally spoke, joining the first in a harmony of distress. But Professor, if both sides used these weapons, didn't they realize they were just causing more suffering for everyone? They did realize it, Lisa said. But they kept using them anyway, hoping to gain an advantage. Soldiers had to wear masks constantly, never knowing when the next gas attack might come. The display showed footage of soldiers stumbling blindly, led by others who could still see. Many were coughing up blood or clutching their throats. The gas attacks became so common that armies developed better masks and detection methods, Lisa continued. So they invented stronger gases. Each side tried to create chemicals that would defeat the other side's protection. Zektar's crystal form was now barely glowing. How long did this continue? 4 years, Lisa said. From 1914 to 1918. The fighting happened not just in France but across Europe, in Africa, in the Middle East, and in the oceans. Ships carrying civilians were sunk without warning. Entire cities were shelled until nothing remained. She changed the display to show maps with red areas indicating battle zones. Nearly half the world seemed to be colored red. By the time it ended, 17 million people were dead and 20 million were wounded, Lisa concluded. Entire generations of young men had been wiped out. Some towns in Europe lost every male between the ages of 18 and 30. The classroom was filled with the sounds of alien distress. Wisp had completely lost cohesion and was just a cloud of worried gas. Korth had disconnected from his hive mind and sat alone with his thoughts for the first time in his life. Zektar was so dim that Lisa worried his life functions might be failing. I need to stop here for today, Lisa said gently. I know this is difficult to understand. Your species have never experienced anything like this. Felnara's lights flickered weakly. Professor Hamilton, you called this World War I. Does that mean your species fought an even larger war later? Lisa nodded slowly. World War II began in 1939, just 21 years after the First War ended. It involved more countries, more soldiers, and more advanced weapons. 50 to 80 million people died. The number seemed to break something in the alien students' minds. Several of them requested immediate medical attention. Mordek's skin had locked into a texture that indicated severe psychological trauma. As the students filed out slowly, supporting each other, Lisa wondered if she was doing the right thing. These beings came from peaceful civilizations that couldn't imagine such brutality, but they needed to understand what humans were capable of before Earth joined the galactic community. She packed her materials and prepared for the next lesson, knowing it would be even harder to explain. How could she make them understand that World War II had been even worse than what they had just learned? Outside the classroom windows, the stars seemed dimmer than usual, as if the universe itself was mourning for the innocent worldview that had just died in her students' minds. Professor Lisa Hamilton entered the classroom a week later to find only 8 of her original 12 students. 4 had requested medical leave after the previous lesson. The ones who remained looked different somehow, as if learning about World War I had aged them in ways their species had never experienced before. Zektar sat in his usual spot, but his crystal body remained dim and cloudy. Felnara floated in her tank, her lights barely flickering in pale, worried colors. Korth had managed to reconnect with his hive mind, but Lisa could tell the connection was weaker than before. The shared consciousness of his species was struggling to process what individual members had learned about human warfare. Medical staff from several species had contacted Lisa throughout the week. They reported that her students were experiencing something their civilizations had no name for. The closest translation was empathic trauma from impossible knowledge. Their minds were trying to reject information that conflicted with everything they understood about intelligent life. "I know last week was difficult," Lisa began carefully, "but we need to continue. You need to understand the full scope of human history before Earth joins the Galactic Council." Mordek's rocky skin shifted to a resigned gray texture. "Professor Hamilton, our medical advisors say we should stop these lessons. They believe learning more could cause permanent psychological damage to our species." "I understand their concern," Lisa replied. "But imagine if you learned about human warfare for the first time during a crisis, when Earth was your ally and you needed to make quick decisions. Wouldn't it be better to know the truth now, in a safe environment?" The students exchanged glances, or their species' equivalent of meaningful looks. Finally, Wisp's gaseous form condensed slightly, indicating reluctant agreement. "We will continue," Velnara said, her lights shifting to a determined blue. "But please, Professor, tell us that World War I was the worst of human conflicts. Surely your species learned from such horrible mistakes." Lisa's heart sank. This was the part she had been dreading most. World War I was called the war to end all wars, because people hoped nothing like it would ever happen again. But it wasn't the worst conflict in human history. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Zektar's crystal form went completely transparent, a reaction Lisa had never seen before. World War II began on September 1st, 1939. Lisa continued. "Just 21 years after the First World War ended. Some of the men who fought in the Second War had fathers who died in the First War." Korth made a sound like breaking glass. 21 years? That is barely enough time for a generation to grow up. How could your species repeat such devastation so quickly? "Because we didn't just repeat it," Lisa said quietly. "We made it worse. Much worse." She activated the holographic display, showing a map of the world in 1939. Red areas began spreading across continents like a disease. "This war involved every continent except Antarctica," Lisa explained. "Over 100 million people took part in the fighting. The war lasted 6 years and killed between 50 and 80 million people. The numbers hung in the air like a physical weight." Several students made distress sounds that their translators couldn't handle. 50 million, Lila whispered with both heads speaking in unison. Something that only happened during extreme shock. "That is more than the total population of the Rigelian system." Lisa nodded grimly. The killing was more efficient in World War II. Humans had learned from the First War and developed new weapons and tactics. The display changed to show fast-moving tanks crossing open ground while aircraft flew overhead dropping bombs. Instead of sitting in trenches, armies now moved quickly across vast distances, Lisa continued. This was called Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Entire countries could be conquered in weeks. She showed footage of cities being bombed. Buildings collapsed as explosions bloomed like deadly flowers across urban landscapes. Both sides deliberately targeted civilians, Lisa explained. They bombed cities to destroy the enemy's ability to make weapons and to break their will to fight. London was bombed for 57 consecutive nights. German cities were bombed until nothing remained but rubble. Velnara's lights began flashing, in rapid, panicked patterns. They attacked non-combatants, deliberately? The line between soldiers and civilians disappeared, Lisa said. Everyone was considered part of the war effort. Factories making shoes could also make boots for soldiers. Workers building cars could build tanks instead. The display showed aerial photographs of cities before and after bombing raids. Where once there had been neighborhoods and parks, only empty lots and debris remained. The city of Dresden was bombed, so heavily that the fires created their own weather. Lisa continued. Winds reached hurricane force, sucking people into the flames. 25,000 civilians died in 2 days. Wisp's form was barely holding together. How could pilots drop bombs on children? How could they see houses and schools and still release their weapons? Most pilots never saw individual people, Lisa explained. They flew too high and too fast. Cities looked like maps from the air. It was easier to think of targets instead of homes. The holographic display changed again, showing crowded train cars and barbed wire fences. Lisa hesitated, knowing this next part would be the hardest for her students to understand. The German government decided that certain groups of people were enemies of their state, she said carefully. They built special camps where they sent millions of civilians to be killed. Zektar's crystal form cracked audibly. Actual physical fissures appeared in his structure. Killed? Not imprisoned? Killed, Lisa confirmed. 6 million Jewish people. Millions of others, including disabled individuals, political prisoners, and members of minority groups. They built factories designed specifically for mass murder. The classroom fell into a silence so complete that Lisa could hear her own heartbeat. The concept of industrial genocide was beyond anything these peaceful species could imagine. Korth disconnected from his hive mind again, unable to share this knowledge with his collective consciousness. Factories for killing people, not for making things but for ending lives. They used poison gas just like in World War I, but in closed chambers, Lisa said. They told people they were going to shower facilities, then released gas that killed everyone inside. They could murder thousands of people in a single day. Mordek's skin had turned completely black, indicating a level of psychological trauma his species had no experience treating. Professor Hamilton, please stop. This cannot be real. No intelligent species would do such things to their own kind. It happened, Lisa said firmly. We have photographs, documents, testimony from survivors, and even from the people who ran the camps. After the war ended, the evidence was so overwhelming that even the perpetrators couldn't deny it. She showed them photographs of the liberation of the camps. Allied soldiers staring in shock at piles of bodies and rooms full of personal belongings, taken from the victims. The soldiers who discovered these places were hardened veterans who had seen years of combat, Lisa continued. But many of them broke down crying when they saw what had been done to innocent people. Velnara's lights went dark completely. In her species, this indicated a complete shutdown of higher brain functions due to trauma. The Pacific War was equally brutal, Lisa continued, knowing she had to finish the lesson despite her students' distress. Japanese and American forces fought over tiny islands, sometimes for months. Single battles killed hundreds of thousands of people. The display showed island battlefields where every tree had been destroyed and the landscape looked like the surface of a dead planet. On the island of Okinawa, the fighting was so intense that 120,000 people died in 82 days, Lisa said. Both military and civilian casualties. Some families chose to kill themselves rather than be captured. How did it end? Wisp managed to ask, his form barely coherent. Lisa paused, knowing that what came next would be the final blow to her students' understanding of human nature. The United States developed a new type of weapon, she said slowly. A single bomb that could destroy an entire city. She showed them photographs of Hiroshima before and after the atomic bomb. Where once there had been a city of 300,000 people, only a wasteland remained. One bomb killed over 100,000 people instantly, Lisa said. Many more died slowly from radiation sickness. 3 days later, they dropped a second bomb on another city. The silence that followed lasted for several minutes. When Zektar finally spoke, his voice was barely audible through his damaged crystal structure. They had weapons that could destroy cities, and they used them twice? The war ended 5 days after the second bomb, Lisa said, but now humans possessed weapons that could end civilization itself. As her students sat in stunned silence, Lisa realized she had fundamentally changed how they viewed intelligent life. These beings had believed that intelligence naturally led to peace and cooperation. Now they knew that the most intelligent species in their local galaxy was also capable of unimaginable violence. The lesson was over, but Lisa knew the real education was just beginning. Her students would never see the universe the same way again. Professor Lisa Hamilton looked at her remaining 5 students 2 weeks later. The medical staff had cleared only half of her original class to continue. The others were still receiving treatment for psychological trauma that their species had no previous experience with. Even these 5 survivors looked fundamentally changed by what they had learned. Zektar's crystal body now had permanent cracks running through it. The medical team said these were physical manifestations of mental stress that might never heal. Velnara spent most of her time in complete darkness, her usual bioluminescent patterns replaced by occasional weak flickers. Kjorth had been permanently disconnected from his hive mind after his collective consciousness rejected the knowledge he carried. The remaining students, Mordek and Wisp, had developed new behaviors their species had never seen before. Mordek's skin now stayed locked in protective textures, while Wisp maintained a much denser form than was natural for his people. "I know you're all struggling with what you've learned," Lisa began gently. "The medical teams have asked me to end these lessons. They say continuing could cause permanent damage to your mental health." Zektar's cracked voice was barely audible. "Professor Hamilton, we need to know everything. If humans can create such destruction with primitive weapons, what happened when they developed better technology?" Lisa had hoped to avoid this question, but she knew her students deserved the complete truth. That brings us to what we call the Cold War. It lasted from 1945 to 1991, about 46 years. Another war? Velnara's lights flickered weakly. How many people died? That's what made the Cold War different, Lisa explained. The 2 most powerful human nations, the United States and Soviet Union, never fought each other directly. Instead, they threatened to destroy the entire world. The holographic display showed Earth with thousands of red dots marking nuclear weapon locations. The dots covered both superpowers and spread to other nations over time. After seeing what nuclear weapons could do to cities, humans built bigger ones, Lisa continued. Some bombs were 1,000 times more powerful than the ones dropped on Japan. They could destroy entire metropolitan areas. Mordek's skin shifted to a texture that indicated complete incomprehension. They built bigger weapons after seeing the destruction. Why would they want more destructive power? Each side was afraid the other would attack first, Lisa explained. So they built more weapons to ensure they could retaliate. This was called mutually assured destruction. If one side launched their nuclear weapons, the other side would launch theirs, and both nations would be completely destroyed. Kjorth made a sound like metal scraping against stone. Since losing his hive-mind connection, he had developed individual emotional responses that often overwhelmed him. They pointed weapons at themselves? This makes no logical sense. For 46 years, both sides maintained thousands of nuclear weapons ready to launch within minutes, Lisa said. Submarines carrying nuclear missiles patrolled the oceans. Underground silos held intercontinental ballistic missiles. Bombers flew constant patrols ready to drop nuclear weapons anywhere in the world. The display showed the flight paths these weapons could take. Lines crisscrossed the globe, each one representing potential destruction on an unimaginable scale. How many weapons? Wisp asked, his gaseous form trembling. At the peak, both sides together had over 70,000 nuclear weapons, Lisa said. Enough to destroy human civilization several times over. The number seemed to break something fundamental. In her students' minds, Velnara's lights went out completely and didn't return. Zektar's cracks spread further through his crystal structure. But they never used them? Mordek asked desperately. They came very close several times, Lisa replied. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the world was probably minutes away from nuclear war. A Soviet submarine commander almost launched a nuclear torpedo, but was stopped by one of his officers. She showed them footage of the tense 13 days when American and Soviet leaders stared at each other across the nuclear abyss. One man's decision prevented the end of human civilization. Lisa continued. If he had pushed a button, hundreds of millions of people would have died within hours. But surely they realized this was madness, Kjorth said, his individual consciousness struggling with concepts his hive mind had protected him from. How could they continue this threat for decades? They convinced themselves it prevented war, Lisa explained. Since both sides would be destroyed in a nuclear exchange, neither side would start one. It was a balance of terror. The holographic display changed to show smaller conflicts around the world. Red areas appeared in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Africa, and Central America. While the superpowers avoided fighting each other directly, they fought proxy wars in other countries, Lisa continued. They supported different sides in local conflicts, turning small disputes into major wars. She focused on Vietnam, showing jungle warfare that lasted for years. The Vietnam War involved advanced technology used in primitive conditions. American forces had helicopters, jets, and smart bombs, but fought against enemies who lived in underground tunnels and struck without warning. The footage showed young soldiers, many barely out of their teens, fighting in dense jungle where they couldn't see their enemies. Chemical weapons were used to strip leaves from trees, poisoning the land for generations. This war lasted 20 years and killed over 3 million people, Lisa said. Many American soldiers returned home psychologically damaged by what they had experienced. Some never recovered. Zektar's crack spread further. 20 years, in jungle conditions? How did they maintain the will to fight? That's what humans do, Lisa said quietly. We adapt to any conditions, no matter how horrible. Soldiers learned to fight in swamps, deserts, mountains, and cities. Every environment became a potential battlefield. The display showed the Korean War, where fighting happened in freezing winter conditions. Then the Soviet War in Afghanistan, where mountain warfare lasted 9 years. Each conflict demonstrated human adaptability in the face of suffering. The most disturbing part, Lisa continued, is that humans didn't just fight these wars. We studied them. Military academies were built to teach officers how to fight more effectively. War colleges trained generals in strategy and tactics. She showed them the massive military-industrial complexes that developed during the Cold War, factories producing weapons, research facilities developing new technologies, universities studying warfare. Humans created entire industries devoted to warfare, Lisa explained. Millions of people worked jobs related to military technology. Some of our greatest scientific advances came from military research. WISP's form was barely holding together. They made warfare into a science like studying mathematics or biology. Exactly like that, Lisa confirmed. Humans have studied every aspect of warfare. How to move armies efficiently, how to supply troops in remote locations, how to break enemy morale, how to rebuild after destruction. War became a professional field of study. The display showed modern conflicts in the Middle East where warfare had evolved to include terrorism, cyber attacks, and urban combat in civilian areas. Even after the Cold War ended, humans continued fighting, Lisa said. The wars became more complex. Enemy fighters hid among civilian populations. Battles were fought in cities where every building could contain snipers. She showed footage of soldiers going house to house, never knowing if the next door would hide enemies or innocent families. In Iraq and Afghanistan, human forces fought for over 20 years combined, Lisa continued. The enemy used improvised explosive devices hidden in roads, cars, and buildings. Every step could trigger a bomb. Mordek's skin had turned completely gray. How do soldiers function when any moment could bring death? They develop what we call combat stress, Lisa explained. Their minds change to deal with constant danger. Many suffer from psychological wounds that last long after the fighting ends. The holographic display showed veterans dealing with trauma, unable to adjust to peaceful life after years of warfare. The strangest part, Lisa continued, is that many soldiers who experienced the worst of war became advocates for peace. They understood the true cost of conflict better than anyone. Korth made a confused clicking sound. The same people who fought the wars then opposed them? Humans are contradictory, Lisa said. We can be incredibly violent and incredibly compassionate. Sometimes the same person can be both. Veterans who saw friends die in combat often spent their later years trying to prevent other wars. She showed images of former enemies working together for peace. Soldiers turned diplomats, warriors who became teachers. What you need to understand, Lisa said, looking at her traumatized students, is that humans didn't fight all these wars because we enjoy violence. We fought because we believed our causes were worth fighting for. Freedom, survival, protecting our families and our way of life. Velnara's lights flickered weakly. But the costs were so enormous. How could any cause be worth millions of lives? That's the question humans ask ourselves after every war, Lisa replied. And yet when the next threat appears, we're willing to fight again. Because the alternative might be losing everything we value. The lesson ended with her students sitting in stunned silence. Professor Lisa Hamilton stood before her 5 remaining students for what would be their final lesson. The past month had changed all of them in ways that would last forever. The alien medical teams had documented these changes as the first known cases of a new condition they called warfare trauma syndrome, psychological damage caused by learning about systematic violence that exceeded anything in their species' experience. Zektar's crystal body was now more crack than solid structure, held together by medical devices his people had never needed before. Velnara floated in complete darkness, her natural bioluminescence apparently permanently damaged. Korth sat alone with thoughts and emotions his hive-minded species was not designed to handle. Mordek's skin remained locked in protective textures, while Wisp could barely maintain physical cohesion. Despite their trauma, all 5 had insisted on attending this final class. They needed to understand the complete picture of humanity before making their reports to the Galactic Council. I know these lessons have been difficult for you, Lisa began gently. Your medical teams have asked me to explain something important before we finish. They want to understand how humans can be so violent and still function as a civilization. She activated the holographic display one last time, but instead of showing battlefields, it displayed images of human art, music, literature, and scientific achievements. While humans were fighting all these wars, we were also creating beautiful things, Lisa said. During World War II, when cities were being bombed, humans continued writing poetry, composing music, and painting pictures. Some of our greatest artistic works were created during our most violent periods. The display showed paintings created by soldiers during battles, music written in bombed cities, and books written by people hiding from persecution. The same species that invented poison gas also created vaccines that saved millions of lives, Lisa continued. The same technology used to build missiles was used to send explorers to other worlds. Zektar's damaged voice cracked as he spoke. How is this possible? How can the same minds create both destruction and beauty? That's the paradox of human nature, Lisa replied. We are capable of extreme violence and extreme compassion often at the same time. The soldier who fights brutally during the day might write loving letters to his family at night. She showed them images of field hospitals where doctors worked to save the lives of wounded enemies, even while battles raged nearby. Human medics in war zones treat everyone who needs help, Lisa explained. They save the lives of enemy soldiers, who were trying to kill them hours before. This isn't unusual for us, it's expected. Velnara's lights flickered weakly in confusion. They heal the people they were trying to kill? This makes no sense. It makes perfect sense to humans, Lisa said. We can separate the person from the cause they fight for. A wounded enemy is no longer an enemy. They're just a person who needs help. The display changed to show the aftermath of World War II. Instead of continued fighting, it showed former enemies working together to rebuild destroyed cities. After World War II ended, the United States helped rebuild Japan and Germany, Lisa continued. The same countries that had been bombing each other became close allies. Former enemies worked side by side to create better societies. Mordek's skin shifted slightly, the first change his medical team had seen in weeks. The victors helped the defeated? Why didn't they just take revenge? Because humans understand that today's enemy might be tomorrow's friend, Lisa explained. We learned that helping former enemies recover creates more stable peace than leaving them broken and angry. She showed them the Marshall Plan, where America spent billions of dollars helping Europe recover from the war. Then the display showed Japanese and American veterans meeting decades later as friends. Some of the most effective peace activists are people who fought in wars, Lisa said. Veterans who experienced combat often become the strongest voices against future conflicts. The holographic display showed elderly men who had once fought each other, now working together for peace organizations. Why would warriors become peacekeepers? Korth asked, his individual consciousness struggling with the contradiction. Because they understand the true cost of war better than anyone, Lisa replied. People who have never seen combat might think war is glorious or heroic. Veterans know it's mostly just suffering and loss, so they work harder than anyone to prevent it. The display changed again, showing human peacekeeping forces around the world. Soldiers whose job was not to fight wars, but to prevent them. Humans created international organizations to stop conflicts before they start, Lisa continued. The United Nations, international courts, and peacekeeping forces. The same species that perfected warfare also developed sophisticated methods for avoiding it. She showed them refugee camps where human aid workers risked their lives to help people displaced by conflicts. Medical teams that traveled to dangerous areas to treat anyone who needed help, regardless of which side they supported. The technology humans developed for war also helps us respond to disasters, Lisa explained. Military transport aircraft deliver food to famine areas. Naval ships provide fresh water after earthquakes. Communication systems designed for battlefield coordination help organize disaster relief. Wisp's form condensed slightly as he tried to understand. They use war tools for peace purposes? All the time, Lisa confirmed. Satellites built to watch enemies now monitor climate and natural disasters. Computer networks designed for military communication became the internet that connects our entire world. Medical techniques developed to treat battlefield wounds now save lives in hospitals everywhere. The display showed the progression from military technology to civilian benefits. Radar became air traffic control. GPS guided both missiles and rescue teams. The internet connected both military commanders and school children. But the most important thing you need to understand, Lisa said, looking directly at each of her traumatized students, is why humans developed such capacity for warfare in the first place. The holographic display changed to show Earth's history, with images of natural disasters, dangerous predators, and harsh environments. Earth is not a gentle world, Lisa explained. Humans evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. Earthquakes, floods, droughts, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, and predators that hunted us for food. Survival required constant vigilance and the ability to fight for resources. She showed early humans dealing with saber-toothed cats, surviving in frozen wastelands and competing with other species for shelter and food. Every challenge made humans more adaptable and more determined, Lisa continued. We learned to use tools, work in groups, and never give up even when facing impossible odds. These same traits that helped us survive on Earth also made us effective warriors. Zektar's crystal form brightened slightly for the first time in weeks. So human violence comes from survival instinct? Exactly, Lisa said. But so does human cooperation. Humans who work together survive better than those who fought alone. We learned that former enemies could become valuable allies. Our capacity for warfare is matched by our capacity for forgiveness and cooperation. The display showed examples throughout human history of enemies becoming friends, competitors becoming partners, and fighters becoming builders. What you've learned about human warfare is only half the story, Lisa continued. Yes, humans are capable of terrible violence, but we're also capable of incredible sacrifice for others. Parents die protecting children who aren't their own. Soldiers risk their lives to save wounded enemies. Entire nations spend fortunes helping strangers in distant countries. She showed them images of humans helping during disasters, building schools in poor countries, and sharing medical knowledge freely with the world. The same human who can fight fiercely to protect his family will also work tirelessly to help complete strangers, Lisa explained. We don't see this as contradictory. We see it as being human. Belnara's lights flickered in a pattern Lisa had never seen before. Professor Hamilton, what does this mean for the galaxy? Should we fear humans or welcome them? Lisa smiled for the first time since these lessons began. That depends on what the galaxy needs. If you face a threat that requires warriors who will never give up, who can adapt to any condition, and who will sacrifice everything to protect what they value, then you need humans. The display showed human explorers, scientists, and diplomats working alongside alien species in peaceful cooperation. But if you face challenges that require compassion, creativity, and the ability to turn enemies into friends, you also need humans, Lisa continued. We're the same species that fought all those wars and also created art, music, medicine, and literature. We can be your protectors or your partners depending on what the situation requires. Korth made a sound that his translators finally recognized as something like wonder. You're saying humans are both the most dangerous and most helpful species you've encountered? I'm saying humans are complex, Lisa replied. We can be terrible enemies or loyal allies. We can create unprecedented destruction or unprecedented beauty. What we become depends largely on how we're treated and what we're fighting for. The final holographic display showed Earth from space looking peaceful and blue against the stars.